All right, so I didn't think I was going to end up making a video on the Detroit Pistons at all this summer, but I was reading a Bleacher Report article where they basically broke down 5 teams who made the most improvements to their roster this offseason, and the Pistons were on that list. And I kind of looked at the additions they made, and I'm like, I think with these additions, they can possibly, and I said possibly, be a team at least fighting for a play-in tournament spot. Possibly. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but they could be in that conversation. So let's kind of go back and revisit last season and how things went for them last season. Horrible season, right? I think if we can rank like the 5 biggest disappointments of last year, the Pistons are definitely on that list. For one, they threw a lot of money at Monty Williams, the highest contract ever for a head coach after having a solid stint in Phoenix, leading them to the finals in 2021. And he just did not mesh well with the team and also didn't mesh well with the fans. There were some questionable lineup decisions and rotational decisions that he ended up making, a high prioritization of Killian Hayes, which a lot of Pistons fans were just not happy with. So there was that, right? So that stint by Monty Williams, very disappointing considering how he was looked at once that deal was thrown at him, right? And now he's not coaching anymore. Now, I'm not feeling bad for him because he's making a ton of money. He's going to be paid out the rest of that contract. But this is like the second time where he's been out of a coaching job. And it does leave you wondering, how great of a head coach is he really, right? How much of the success in Phoenix was attributable to him versus Chris Paul, right? But we'll have that conversation, maybe another video. But the year under Monty Williams was just really disappointing considering how highly touted he was as a coach once he got over there to Detroit. Also, you just kind of look at how bad they were from a playing standpoint. That losing streak was ridiculous. And you could just see it on the players' faces. It just shot their confidence. I thought this team was talented enough to like be in that same realm as the Rockets were last season, where they were like fighting for a play-in tournament spot in the Western Conference. I thought the Pistons were just as talented or almost just as talented from a young player's perspective as the Rockets, but that just did not translate out there on the court. So a very, very disappointing season that I just hope we don't see again from them. It was one of the worst regular seasons by any team in NBA history for a team that I thought we had solid expectations for. But what they've done this offseason was prioritize on finding solid veteran pieces that don't stunt the development of some of their key core young guys. I think that's a major thing when it comes to rebuilding a team is figuring out how to add good veteran players to their roster without impeding on the progress of those younger draft picks and things like that. So I talked about that with the Orlando Magic, right? They've done a good job this offseason of bringing in pieces that don't stunt the development of their guys like Paolo Banchero or Franz Wagner. So the Pistons this summer, they added Tim Hardaway Jr. to the roster alongside with Tobias Harris and Malik Beasley. 3 really good perimeter shooters, 3 really good catch and shoot guys, 3 guys who can really help space the floor for a Pistons team that struggled heavily from a floor spacing standpoint. Why is that a problem? Well, they have a really good young playmaker in Cade Cunningham, who I think still has potential to be a top 10, top 5 player in this league. He's a sizable point guard who can score the ball in multiple ways and is a great playmaker. But it's tough for you to be a great playmaker if you don't have the spacing. They did not have the spacing at all last season. Now you have 3 really good experienced floor spacers between Harris, between Tim Hardaway Jr., and also between Malik Beasley, who was very efficient from the three-point line last season. So just by virtue of their spacing being a lot better, they're going to be a better three-point shooting team, and that adds a ton to their offense that was just completely lackluster last season. And a key to developing a young team also is just getting them to figure out how to actually win games. It is tough for you to develop if you don't know how to win games. A lot of guys are great and talented, but that inability to know how to operate down the stretch ends up haunting them later in their careers. If you look at a lot of really good young players in the league right now, so I'm going to use an example, SGA, right? He's really good now because early on in his career, he knew how to win. Why did he know how to win? Well, he played alongside with great veteran players. So his first year, you're playing with the Clippers. You have Patrick Beverley and Lou Williams playing alongside you, right? And in his second year, you're getting into the playoffs with the Thunder, and you're playing alongside with one of the greatest point guards of all time in Chris Paul. SGA works as a player because he's a young guy who was accustomed to winning, and that is because he played alongside with really good veteran players who could help guide him, right? So that's very important. So if you look at the Pistons, yes, you want to be in a rebuilding situation. Yes, you don't want to stunt the development of your younger pieces, but you still want to add just as many veteran pieces. And I briefly mentioned this. You want to add as many veteran pieces as possible that, for one, don't stunt those guys' development, but can still at the same time help you stay competent enough, right? That is the biggest thing. You're not going to develop as a player if you're stuck not winning, right? You have to figure that part of the game out. And I think by adding guys like Harris and Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. is a really, really good start. Hardaway Jr. has played in 2 conference finals throughout his career and in NBA finals last season. No, he didn't play well, and I'm not the biggest Tim Hardaway Jr. fan at all, but he has that experience. Tobias Harris has extensive experience. And to kind of talk about Tobias Harris here, he's important to this team's offense because I think he is going to be a pretty high priority late in games. They're going to call on his number to kind of create shots and make shots for this team. And his career has been really, really interesting. This is his second stint here in Detroit. His stint with the Sixers was kind of based on this idea that maybe he can emerge into like this all-star caliber player. They threw a lot of money at him. I thought he was going to end up getting there, but he never did. His numbers were solid, right? Really efficient shooter, just never really cracked like 20 points per game, never really became like that game takeover guy that they needed him to become, right? And so that just was not a role where he was optimized at, right? Trying to become like a number 2 option or a primary offensive option for a contender. Here in Detroit, he can do that, right? He can shot create at a higher level, at a higher volume, and that'll actually help this team get to where they need to be. It wasn't going to help Philly with trying to contend for a title, but it's going to help Detroit when it comes to just trying to be a better, more confident young group that's trying to tack on more wins. That's going to, in effect, help with the experience and the development of their younger pieces. And as I said, I'm just excited for what this does for Cade Cunningham. I'm just a big fan of his game. I've been a fan of his game since he was at Oklahoma State. I do think he is a generational talent, and he kind of got looked past and looked over because of the guys that kind of came after him. And that happens a lot with the NBA, right? Where we forget about how great a player was in his draft class because the next draft class always seems to overshadow them, right? Like that happens a lot. Kind of happened to Paulo Banchero a bit. He had an amazing rookie season, but a lot of people stopped talking about him because of Victor Wembanyama. That kind of happened to Cade. He's gotten overshadowed, and also because the Pistons have been that bad, it's been easy to forget him. But I like what this increased spacing and these increased options do for a guy who I think is going to be an elite superstar point guard sometime down the road. And he's not far off from it. Like I said, last year, a lot of statistical improvements. He was 20 points per game and nearly 8 assists last season as their starting point guard when he was out there on the court. So this does a lot for Cade's individual development. The best thing you can do for a young point guard is put the best options around him as possible. And finally, I'm going to kind of get back to this, and that is the coaching, right? They have done a good job at getting a good replacement for Monty Williams after having a big letdown from him last season. And they got JB Bickerstaff, who had a pretty decent stint as the Cavs head coach, right? He got them to the playoffs in 2 seasons and also was there when they were kind of rebuilding and just trying to figure things out. So he could be a really good connector with younger guys, which is just very important when it comes to building a young team up from the ground up to whatever point you're trying to get them to. So very good pickup with JB Bickerstaff. The issues also with Monty Williams, as I said earlier, were rotational decisions and things like that. That's obviously going to be a big cleanup point here for Bickerstaff and a big focal point as he's here on this Pistons roster. A lot to be excited about as far as the coaching goes after a rough year 1 and only year with Monty Williams being there. So my expectations for this team isn't for them to be a playoff team, isn't for them to be a play-in tournament team, even though I think they can end up competing for that. But I think they can end up having that same type of season that the Rockets had last year, where they were kind of just fighting for a play-in tournament spot, which is a major step up from what they've been the last couple of years. They've had some really bad years and really weird years since like 2009, right? They've had years where they've made the playoffs with these like really weird rosters, but have lost in the first round. And they've had years where they've just flat out been one of the worst teams in the league. This is a season where there actually seems to be a direction that the franchise is going in, especially a positive direction that they're going in. So we'll see how things end up turning out. A lot of upside and a lot to be excited about these days for Pistons fans. Very good roster moves, and we'll see how they're able to execute on the court coming into the 2024-25 season.